guys, today we're going to talk about how we can use Azure Resource Manager templates with Microsoft Azure to automate network deployment within a matter of minutes. Now, firstly, let's go over what an Azure Resource Manager template is. Here we have on the screen the skeleton of an Azure Resource Manager template, or an ARM template for short. The first thing we specify is the schema, which defines the objects and attributes throughout the entire ARM template that can be named. And the second thing that we utilize is the parameters, which are values that we provide during deployment that allow us to use this template over and over again in a bunch of different environments, which makes this very, very useful because we can just tweak a few parameters and utilize this again and again. The next block that we utilize is the functions block, which allows us to create customized functions that simplify the template. And we can also specify variables, which are values that we define that are used throughout the template, and we can call from the parameters that we specified earlier in order to append onto these variables and create unique names and resources. And finally, the meat and potatoes of the whole ARM template is this resource block here, which is where we're going to specify, as it states, all of the resources that we want to deploy. So for example, for this ARM template that we're going to stand up in Azure, we're going to deploy a virtual network, a network security group, a bastion subnet in order to RDP into our VMs. We're going to stand up 3 Microsoft Server 2016 virtual machines to create 2 domain controllers and 1 file server and 1 Windows 10 client machine. And finally, here we have the outputs block, which is where we're going to put anything or specify what we want output after this ARM template is processed and everything is provisioned. So for example, say we need to know the admin username and password that was created, or the virtual machine names or IP addresses, you name it. If you need to know it at the end of the whole provisioning process, you're going to stick that here in the outputs block. And one of the nice things about Visual Studio Code is the ability to stick in templates that are already built in. It's a highly modular process. So we can start out with our base skeleton here. And for example, if I want to add a new parameter, I can just type in parameter, hit tab, and it's going to pop out the skeleton of a parameter that I can put in here. And then I'm able to name or tab through the name sections that I can alter to meet my needs. For example, naming the parameter, specifying the type that it can be, and it will tell you all the different types that it can be. And if you put something in here that's not allowed, it's automatically going to validate this template as you go along, so you can fix your mistakes instead of typing out a whole template, trying to run it just to find the mistakes and debug it from there. So for example, this tells us the value must be one of the following values. So we're going to delete that bit that I put on the beginning, and it's going to validate it, and now everything is as it should be. We can specify the metadata such as owner information, give it a description, and then later on we can call these parameters down to create unique names and unique resources further on down in our template. Next, we have the functions block, and the same thing. I can type in, for example, I want a new user function, a namespace function. I can just hit tab, and it will give me the basic template that I need to fill out and customize for my deployment. And that holds true for every one of these different blocks that you have. I can create a new variable and name it and give it a value. And then the fourth block here is the big meat and potatoes block of your template. It's where you specify the resources that you want to deploy. And they have built in all of the different ARM resources that you can put in. So for example, I want to create a virtual network. I'd type in VNet and you can see all of the different templates that they have here. But we're going to stick in a VNet and it gives us the framework to build that off of. We can name it. Again, you can see here I'm calling from up above the resource group.location that we specify, creating different subnets, naming them. And finally, I can specify any outputs that I want. So for example, I could specify IP address, virtual machine name, etc. And I can keep doing that and utilizing the same process to build as much as I want, implement as many resources as I want, and customize this to be exactly what I want it to be. Our example here that we'll be building our network on Azure with, you can see that I've specified several parameters for different virtual machines, the different NIC cards they have, the virtual network that we'll be creating, the network security group that we will be creating, and specified those all in the parameter section. And then we get here to the resource block. I'm going to shrink this up here. Get here to the resource block and you can see all of the resources that are specified for the creation of this network. And you see the network security groups, the virtual networks that we will be creating, the different subnets that we are naming, the location that we're creating these in. And one of the nice things about ARM templates is that it builds them in an incremental process, which means it analyzes this JSON file and determines what resources you want, and it will automatically determine what order they need to be built in and created in. And it does that by utilizing these depends on statements. So for example here, we want to create a virtual network subnet that's going to depend on the creation of our virtual network. So we'll check here to see that the resource is created that it needs before it creates this, and it does that for all of these different resources that we specify, so that it creates them in the order that we need to. So let's go ahead and head over here to Microsoft Azure, and we're going to open up the Microsoft Azure PowerShell prompt and wait for it to connect to the terminal. Now if you don't have a storage specified yet, it will ask you to do that, but we have done that beforehand, so we can just jump right in. The first thing I'm going to do is specify the resource group name and the location that I want this network provisioned in. So here at the prompt, I'm going to store a variable resource group name, and I'm going to call my resource group name tier resource. And then we will store in a location the Azure region that we want these resources stood up in. And we're going to create these all in West US. But for example, if we wanted some redundancy or failover, we could separate these resources into different Azure regions. That way, if we lost connectivity in one region, we could transition over our resources and replicate to the other region so that we maintain connectivity and keep our network going. Then we're going to specify West US for that location. And then finally, I'm going to utilize the new Azure ARM resource group commandlet. Here, new Azure ARM resource group. Utilize the resource group name that we stored earlier, the location that we just stored, and create the RM group. And it'll spit out here. We see that our tier resource group name is utilized. The location is West US, and it has succeeded utilizing our subscription here. The next thing that we're going to do is specify a variable called storage account name. And it's going to prompt me for the storage account name that I want this utilizing. And the minimum is 3 characters and the maximum is 24 characters, which you can only use numbers and lowercase letters. If you try and use any special characters or uppercase, it will not accept it. I'm going to specify tier storage. And this does have to be unique across Azure, so you have to be careful of that. There we've created our storage account. Or excuse me, we've created our storage account name, and so now we're going to create the storage account utilizing another variable called storage account and using the new AZ storage account with the resource group name that we specified, the storage account name that we specified, in the location, utilizing a standard LRS SKU name. We're going to hit enter on that and wait for it to create that storage account. And so you can see here it's given us a new prompt, so that has succeeded. We didn't get any error messages. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to utilize our template. So I'm going to specify in a template URI variable where my resource template is stored on GitHub. So I create a variable, store a URI in there, and then utilize the new AZ resource group deployment commandlet to run that entire JSON file. Microsoft Azure will analyze it, decide which resources need to be created first, and automatically do that. And hit enter here. And I'm back from my coffee break, and with the magic of some modern video editing, we're done here. So as you can see, our template that we ran utilizing the resource group name tier resource succeeded, and utilized in incremental mode, which we talked about earlier, to analyze the template and stand up the resources in the order they needed to. And we have our parameters here, so you can see we've created several virtual machines, a virtual network, a network security group, and the NIC cards that go along with it. So let's go ahead and head up here to the Azure portal page. Go ahead and click refresh on that so we can see our new resource. And we'll go over here and I'm going to look for all of these different resources. So as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 virtual machines and the virtual network. So let's go ahead and run here to the virtual network and utilize a really handy feature, the network diagram, to help us visualize the network that we just created. So as you can see here, we created the virtual network with 6 different subnets, including the Azure Bastion subnet, which we utilize to RDP into all of our resources. We created the 4 NIC cards for each of the virtual machines and a network security group that we can configure with access control lists to secure our network. So as you can see, utilizing less than 10 PowerShell commands and an ARM template, we were able to provision an entire network with 4 virtual machines in less than 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me.